Sand looks like the simplest thing in America, until you ask what had to die, burn, flood, melt, or be buried to put one handful under your feet. In that handful, there can be dead mountains from the Rockies, ancient dunes turned into stone in Utah, white gypsum from New Mexico, river sediment from the Mississippi, coral ground down by life, desert sand fused by the first atomic test, and old native stories where land rises from water on the back of a turtle. Then the modern world steps in and turns those grains into concrete, glass, fracking sand, beach repairs, highways, suburbs, and money. What Americans shake out of their shoes is not just dirt. It is a crime scene, a construction site, a myth, and a planetary archive at the same time. The real trap is not that sand comes from rock. That part sounds almost too easy. Rock breaks, grains fall, wind and water carry them away, and somewhere at the end of the story, a beach appears. Nice, clean, almost school book friendly. But America has a much stranger version sitting in plain sight. In Utah, some of the great sandstone cliffs were once loose dunes. Not metaphorically, not poetically. Actual ancient desert sand was buried, pressed, cemented, turned into stone, lifted into cliffs, and then exposed again to wind, rain, and gravity. The dune became rock. Now the rock is slowly returning to sand. That is the loop. Dune, stone, dune again. Once you see that loop, the whole subject changes. Sand is no longer just the corpse of a mountain. Sometimes it is the ancestor of a mountain. Sometimes it is the memory of a desert that became a wall. Sometimes it is a future cliff still lying under your shoe. This is why the American story of sand should not begin on a beach. A beach is too obvious. A beach lets the viewer relax too early. The stronger opening is a canyon wall in Utah, a red sandstone cliff glowing in the sun, while tourists look up and think they are seeing something solid. They are not wrong. It is solid now. But the uncomfortable part is that solidity is only a temporary job. William Dickinson and George Garrels spent years reading the tiny mineral clocks hidden inside ancient sandstones of the Colorado Plateau. They were not looking at a cliff like a tourist. They were looking at zircon grains, small mineral survivors that can carry the age signature of older rocks. Through those grains, the sandstone begins to talk. Some of the sand in these ancient desert deposits may have traveled from far away, from source regions linked to the ancient Appalachian system. A grain that now sits in a wall of Utah stone may have started on the other side of the continent. Hold that image for a second. A piece of old eastern mountain breaks down. A river moves it. Wind takes over. It joins a desert. It becomes part of a dune. The dune is buried. The buried dune becomes stone. The stone rises into a canyon wall. Millions of years later, the canyon wall begins to crumble. The grain is free again. That is not a straight line. That is a trap door. Humans want origins to behave like birth certificates. This thing came from this place, on this date, by this cause. Sand refuses. It can be child and parent, ruin and building block, evidence and disguise. In Utah, the same material changes role so many times that the word origin starts to feel too small. That is the main mystery. How can something we treat as loose, weak, and disposable become stone, then return as loose grains again? And if sand can become rock, and rock can become sand, what exactly are we standing on when we call something solid? The first answer begins with weathering, but not in the dead textbook way. Rock loses by being bothered for a very long time. Heat expands it, cold contracts it. Water enters cracks. Ice pushes those cracks wider. Roots force their way into weaknesses. Chemistry works without drama. Rainwater becomes slightly acidic. Feldspar alters. Iron oxidizes. Some minerals dissolve, others turn into clay. What looked like a permanent object slowly loses the agreement that held it together. A crack is not impressive at first. It is just a line. Then water uses it, frost uses it, a root uses it. The crack becomes a channel, then a weakness, then a break. Rock does not always collapse like a building in a disaster movie. Often it fails like an old lie. One small pressure after another, until the structure can no longer pretend. Quartz survives this process better than many other minerals. That is why so much ordinary sand is quartz-rich. Quartz is not glamorous. It does not have the vanity of gold or the color drama of copper minerals. It simply stays. While weaker minerals dissolve, alter, or become clay, quartz keeps showing up at the end of the sorting process. So the familiar pale sand of many beaches and rivers is not a gift chosen for beauty. It is what survived the audition. But white sands in New Mexico interrupts that story. Its dunes are not ordinary quartz sand. They are gypsum. That matters because gypsum normally dissolves too easily to build huge dune fields. In the Tularosa Basin, unusual conditions allowed gypsum to accumulate, break into grains, and move as sand across an enormous white landscape. It looks like snow, behaves like a desert, and quietly mocks the lazy idea that sand is always the same material. White sands is useful because it breaks the viewer's confidence. Just when you think sand means quartz, America gives you gypsum dunes. Just when you think dunes mean heat and yellow desert, Colorado puts the tallest dunes in North America beneath cold mountain scenery. Just when you think rock is the opposite of sand, Utah shows you a cliff that used to be a dune. The subject keeps refusing simple boxes. At Great Sand Dunes in Colorado, the trick is movement. The dunes rise below the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, like a desert that wandered into the wrong room and stayed. Streams move grains down. Wind pushes them back. Mountain shape, valley winds, seasonal water, and sediment supply all keep the system alive. It is not a pile. It is a machine. A dune is motion slowed down until the human eye becomes easy to fool. If you watch for 5 minutes, it is scenery. If you watch with the patience of geology, it is a crowd in migration. One grain hops, another slides, a slope collapses. The wind edits the surface. Water steals material, then the wind returns it. Nothing needs to hurry. The machine is old enough to be calm. This is where the living sand and dead sand idea begins to matter. Living sand is not mystical. It is sand still doing work. In a dune, it moves. On a beach, it absorbs wave energy. In a river, it travels with sediment load. In a delta, it helps build land. On a barrier island, it shifts, protects, retreats, and reforms. Living sand is not alive like an animal, but it is active inside a system. It has a job. Dead sand has been removed from the cycle. It may hold up a building. It may sit inside concrete. It may become glass. It may prop open fractures in a shale well. It may serve industry perfectly. But it no longer feeds a beach, moves through a river, or helps a delta breathe. It has been arrested. That word matters. Arrested. Not destroyed, not useless, arrested. A grain locked in a highway is doing something important for humans. It helps carry cars, trucks, school buses, ambulances, Amazon vans, and the entire nervous system of a country that cannot stop moving. But that grain is no longer part of the river, the dune, or the shore. It has changed citizenship. It left the natural system and entered the American-built environment. This is not a moral sermon. It is a transfer of function. And America performs that transfer on a gigantic scale. Concrete, glass, asphalt, foundries, filtration systems, electronics, beach nourishment, fracking, suburbs, airports, bridges, seawalls. Sand is everywhere, because sand has the perfect economic disguise. It looks cheap. It looks common. It looks like nothing you would ever need to protect until the moment the right kind of sand is missing. The right kind is the key. The world may look full of sand, but industry does not want just any sand. Desert sand is often too rounded and too smooth for good concrete, because wind has polished it too well. Concrete usually wants grains that grip each other. Angular grains, clean grains, strong grains, grains in the right size range. A desert can be full of sand and still be useless for the job a city wants done. That is the absurdity. The planet can look overloaded with sand, while construction still hunts for suitable grains. In the upper Midwest, this hunt took a very American form. Frack sand from Wisconsin and Minnesota became valuable because the grains were strong, well-sorted, and useful in hydraulic fracturing. They are pumped underground with fluid to keep tiny fractures open inside rock so oil and gas can flow. Think about that. A grain that once belonged to ancient sediment becomes a tool for forcing energy out of stone. The grain goes down into the earth again, but not as part of a natural cycle. This time it goes as industrial hardware. That is a strange fate. Sand begins as broken rock, becomes sediment, is buried in old deposits, is mined by modern industry, shipped by rail, and injected into another rock so fossil fuel can come out. It is almost a parody of geology. The earth makes the grain slowly. America puts it on a schedule. Now return to the coast. A beach seems like the most natural place in the world until you learn how often Americans rebuild it. In many places, beach nourishment has turned shorelines into managed infrastructure. The ocean takes sand. Engineers pump sand back. The beach returns. Tourists arrive. Property values breathe again. Then the next storm comes and reminds everyone who has the longer contract. Orrin Pilkey spent much of his career warning Americans that shorelines are not fixed objects. Rob Young continued that line of criticism, arguing again and again that beaches are dynamic systems, not furniture placed in front of oceanfront real estate. Their point is not that every beach project is stupid. The sharper point is that Americans keep trying to make a moving boundary behave like a sidewalk. A nourished beach can be beautiful. It can protect homes. It can buy time. It can support a town's economy. But it also reveals something embarrassing. The vacation image is being maintained by machines. Sand is dredged, pumped, bulldozed, shaped, and sold back to the public as nature. The beach becomes a soft wall. This is where the Mississippi becomes central. A river is not just water heading downhill. It is a conveyor belt for a continent. It carries rock flour, sand, silt, clay, soil, and the scraped memory of a watershed. For thousands of years, the Mississippi helped build land in coastal Louisiana by delivering sediment. The river fed the delta. Then the river was disciplined. Levees, dams, channels, bank stabilization, navigation works, flood control, industrial canals. The system was changed for reasons humans understand very well. Farms needed protection. Cities needed protection. Ships needed a predictable route. Floods had to be controlled. The river was treated less like a wild land builder and more like a liquid highway. But a liquid highway does not nourish a coast the way a wandering river does. Sediment that once spread across wetlands is trapped, redirected, or sent too far out. Add subsidence, sea level rise, storms, and the scars of oil and gas infrastructure, and Louisiana begins to lose land at a pace that turns geology into politics. A delta can starve. That phrase should stay in the script because it changes the feeling. A delta is not just eroding, it is hungry. It was built by sediment, and now part of its food supply has been interrupted. In that moment, sand stops being scenery. It becomes nutrition for land. Living sand feeds. Dead sand is locked away. That is the middle of the film, not a side note, the central turn. Once a grain is in a dune, river, delta, or beach, it participates in Earth's motion. Once it is inside a freeway, a window, a seawall, a subdivision foundation, or a fracking well, it serves humans and leaves that motion behind. America is not only using sand, it is relocating sand from living systems into dead structures. Dead for nature, useful for us. That tension is the American story. Now the mythological layer can enter without feeling decorative. In Earth Diver, traditions told among different indigenous peoples of North America, land emerges from water through a small act that should not work but does. A being dives. Mud is brought up from below. Land forms on the back of a turtle or expands from a tiny bit of earth. These are not geology lessons, and not one single story shared by all native nations. They are sacred narratives with their own communities, versions, and meanings. But they fit the sand mystery because they start from the opposite direction. Geology often shows land breaking down into grains. These stories imagine land beginning as a small piece of matter pulled from water. Not a continent ready-made, a handful, a fragile beginning. America's sand sits between those images. Land breaks apart and becomes grains. Grains gather and become land again. A delta grows from sediment. A dune becomes stone. A cliff becomes sand. A beach appears where the sea, river, wind, and life temporarily agree. Religious language adds another pressure point. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes. In the United States, the phrase still echoes in funeral ritual, church language, movies, novels, and cultural memory. It is not mineralogy. It will not tell you whether a grain is quartz or gypsum. But it tells the human body something it usually tries to forget. You are not outside the cycle. You are temporarily shaped material. That is why sand feels more disturbing when you take it seriously. It is not just broken landscape. It is a reminder that forms do not keep their names forever. Mountain becomes grain. Grain becomes stone. Stone becomes cliff. Cliff becomes grain. Shell becomes beach. Beach becomes concrete. Concrete becomes rubble. Body becomes matter. The world keeps changing the labels after we leave the room. Conspiracy versions grow out of that discomfort. Slow processes do not satisfy everyone. A million years of erosion has no villain. A delta starved by engineering is too bureaucratic. A buried layer under a city invites a darker explanation. Mud flood and Tartaria-style communities look at basements, buried windows, old street levels, abandoned structures, strange urban layers, and imagine a covered world. A civilization hidden under dirt, a past erased and paved over. As a global explanation, that does not hold up. Historians, archaeologists, geologists, and urban researchers can explain these cases without inventing a worldwide cover-up. A raised street here, a flood deposit there, a basement misread as a buried floor, a city rebuilt over itself, a mining town abandoned, a neighborhood erased by a highway. Local reasons can look mysterious when stripped of context, but the emotional hook is real because burial is real. The earth does cover things. Dunes swallow structures. Floods leave sediment. Cities build over older cities. Reservoirs drown towns. Volcanic ash can freeze a day in place. Archaeology exists because the past is often under something else. The mistake is not believing that layers hide history. They do. The mistake is believing every layer is proof of the same secret. America is full of layers people argue over. Mounds built by indigenous cultures were once misattributed by outsiders who refused to credit native builders. Ghost towns sit in dust after the money leaves. Desert ruins decay under wind. Coastal towns retreat. Old neighborhoods disappear under interstates. None of that proves a lost super-civilization. It proves something colder. A country can bury its past without needing a global conspiracy. Sometimes bureaucracy, development, neglect, and weather do the job. Now comes life. Not all sand begins as rock. Some of it begins as body. On reef-connected beaches, especially in places such as Hawaii and parts of Florida, white sand can include broken shells, coral fragments, calcareous algae, foraminifera, and other hard remains of marine organisms. The beach looks pure because the evidence has been ground beyond recognition. The parrotfish is the best insult to postcard beauty. It bites reef material while feeding on algae, grinds carbonate in its body, and releases part of it as sand. Some of the white paradise under a beach towel may have passed through a fish. That sounds like a joke, but it is a mechanism. Life manufactures landscape, then tourism sells the finished product. A shell breaks, a reef is chewed, a microscopic skeleton remains. Waves grind, currents sort. The result becomes beach. The human arrives at the end of a biological demolition process and calls it relaxation. Volcanic sand tells another version. Hawaii's black sand beaches can form when basaltic lava cools, shatters, and is broken by waves. In rare places, green sand owes its color to olivine-rich material. Color matters because it ruins the idea that sand has one neutral face. White gypsum, red sandstone, black basaltic sand, green olivine-rich grains, pale quartz beaches, shell sand, coral sand. The grain's color is often a confession. Some sands even sing. Under the right conditions, dry, well-sorted grains can produce a low booming or squeaking sound when they slide together on dunes. The sound feels supernatural if you hear it without knowing the mechanism. A mountain of grains becomes an instrument. Again, the pattern returns. The scientific explanation does not kill the strangeness, it gives it teeth. Then the story turns glassy. Glass is what happens when the grain leaves roughness behind. Silica-rich sand can become windows, bottles, lenses, screens, laboratory equipment, fiber optics. A grain that once belonged to a river or beach becomes transparency. That is almost too elegant. Humans learn to take the broken skin of the earth, heat it, refine it, and look through it. This is the quiet bridge to other material obsessions. Gold makes humans dream of wealth and power. Quartz and silica make them dream of seeing, measuring, enclosing, connecting. One substance becomes treasure, another becomes vision. Sand sits closer to civilization than it gets credit for, because civilization needs surfaces it can look through and structures it can stand on. But glass has a darker American chapter. Trinity. On July 16, 1945, the first nuclear test fused part of the New Mexico desert surface into greenish glass, called trinitite. Desert ground met a human-made fireball and changed state. The image is obscene in its simplicity. Sand and soil entered the nuclear age before most people even knew the nuclear age had begun. Trinitite is not a myth, it is a material witness. It proves that humans learned how to write energy into the ground. No ancient alien story is needed. No lost empire is needed. A modern state, a weapon program, and a desert surface were enough. That is why ancient nuclear war theories cling to glassy deserts and vitrified materials. The reasoning is seductive. If a nuclear test can fuse sand into glass, and ancient glass exists in deserts, maybe the old world had similar weapons. Maybe myths of heavenly fire remember technology. Maybe destroyed cities were not metaphorical. The leap is dramatic, but the evidence does not carry it. Natural impact processes volcanic processes, lightning, fires, and other high-energy events can create strange materials. Similar appearance does not equal same cause. Still, the theory belongs in the story because it shows how sand becomes an argument. A glassy fragment in the desert can be read as geology, military history, mythic fire, or conspiracy evidence. The material does not change, the courtroom changes. Cosmic impact adds a real external force. Earth is not a closed box. Meteorites fall. Micrometeorites and cosmic dust arrive constantly. Large impacts can shock, fracture, melt, and transform rock. Impact glass and shocked minerals are genuine geological evidence. That does not mean American beaches are made from space. It means the surface of Earth has always been edited by visitors from outside. A grain under your foot is probably not a tiny asteroid, but the planet on which that grain moves is constantly receiving material from the sky. The archive is terrestrial, but the room is not sealed. Now the modern layer closes in. Sand crisis sounds ridiculous until you understand selection. Humanity uses enormous quantities of sand and gravel, mainly for construction. The number is so large that it stops feeling real. Billions of tons vanish into concrete, asphalt, glass, land reclamation, roads, buildings, and infrastructure. The problem is not that sand as a concept is rare. The problem is that useful sand, in the right place, with the right grain shape and environmental cost, is not infinite. Illegal sand mining becomes possible because the material looks worthless until demand turns it into money. Around the world, people have fought, stolen, bribed, dredged, and destroyed for sand. It sounds absurd only if you still think sand is beach dust. Once it becomes concrete, it becomes power. In America, the drama often wears legal clothes. Permits, dredging contracts, coastal management plans, frac sand mines, construction supply chains, lawsuits, environmental reviews. Less cinematic than Pirates maybe, but not less serious. The grain enters paperwork, industry, real estate, energy, and politics. And then there is plastiglomerate, one of the ugliest signatures of our age. Plastic melts, sticks to sand, shell, rock fragments, organic debris, and hardens into a new human-marked material. The Earth does not need to be angry to record us. It only needs to mix, bury, press, and wait. That thought is worse than punishment. Punishment would at least mean the planet cared. Instead, it classifies. Mountain, shell, lava, quartz, gypsum, trinitite, concrete, plastic. The archive accepts everything, even us. By now, the loop from Utah has changed meaning. Dune becomes stone. Stone becomes sand. Sand becomes concrete. Concrete becomes rubble. Plastic enters the grains. Nuclear fire makes glass. A beach is pumped back into place. A delta starves because sediment no longer arrives. A sacred story remembers land raised from water. A conspiracy imagines an older world hidden under layers. Industry sends sand underground to break energy out of rock. The loop is no longer natural. We have entered it. That is the difference between the old planet and modern America. The old planet used water, wind, pressure, life, fire, and impact. America adds dredges, highways, glass towers, suburbs, fracking wells, nuclear tests, beach contracts, and plastic waste. The grain keeps changing roles, but now one of those roles is evidence. A geologist can still answer a precise question. This sample is quartz-rich. That one is gypsum. This grain is rounded by wind. That one is shell. This sandstone was once a dune. That glass came from extreme heat. This beach was nourished by dredged material. This concrete contains sand taken out of a natural system. specific samples can be read. That is the strength of science, not its weakness. The larger mystery is not where all sand comes from. There is no single answer. The mystery is why humans looked at a material with so many lives and treated it like nothing. The final clue is not on a remote beach or inside a laboratory. It is in the car after the trip. A few grains fall from a sneaker onto the floor mat. They look meaningless, but one grain may have been part of a mountain. Another may have crossed a continent. Another may have waited inside stone for ages. Another may come from a shell, a dune, a dredge pipe, a quarry, a reef, a construction site, or a river that no longer feeds its coast the way it once did. Sand is the earth reduced to grains, but in America the archive has become crowded with our fingerprints. The strangest thing about sand is not that it comes from rock. It is that rock can come from sand. Sand can come back from rock. And now America is teaching the grain one more trick: how to become evidence against us.